Hi everyone, it's Miss Jess from the Monroe Street Art Center, and I have a spooky silhouette project today for your Halloween art kit. So in your art kit, you're gonna find a few things that we need for this project. At the very bottom of your kit, you have a nice thick piece of this beautiful speckled cardstock. The reason we're using such a thick piece of paper for this project is because the paints that we're using today are acrylic paints. If you have a piece of paper that's really thin and you try to paint acrylics on top of it, sometimes the paper gets a little bit wrinkly, it might rip or tear, or just kind of fall apart because it can't really hold up to how thick this paint is. So this is what we're gonna use for our silhouette project, okay? The other thing inside your kit that you're gonna need today are your 3 containers of acrylic paint. Now, what that means is acrylic paint is like a professional kind of paint. When you use these, you want to work at a table space or a counter space that can either get messy or that you want to cover up. Sometimes acrylic paint is hard to get out of clothing or counter surfaces. So just to forewarn you, think about setting up your space for this project before you dive right in, okay? You're gonna have 3 different colors to use. You will either have a purple or a blue, right? Depends on which kit you get. You'll have a little bit of black, and you're gonna have a little bit of white, okay? For my palette today, I'm going to be using a paper plate, okay, because it's easy to throw away when I'm done. It's the Lazy Painter's palette. You're gonna need a paintbrush and a container of water to rinse your brush off. Maybe even a paper towel, because this kind of paint doesn't need any extra water. The only reason you need the water is to rinse your brush off in between colors, okay? So actually, before I dip my brush in my paint, I'm gonna dry it off. I'm just gonna use my tabletop today because I've got this big, thick brown piece of paper on here. Okay, then I'm gonna portion out some paint for myself. I'm gonna have 3 different spots. 1 for purple, or you can just use them right out of the container if you want to. 1 for my black. Let me scoop this one out of here because this one's really thick. And then 1 for my white. 1, 2, 3 different spots, okay? Now, the first part to this project is to do our fade. What that means is I have a lighter spot at the top of my paper that almost looks like the moon, right? That's a lot of white with a little bit of purple. But notice how when you get further away from the moon, it gets darker and darker and darker until all you see is our black silhouette, right? Okay. Silhouettes, by the way, are kind of like shadows. So you don't really see details. Like you can't see my witch's eyes, right? Or my witch's nose. You see the outline of it. You see the shadow of what it looks like. It's like the shadows being cast by the moon, okay? So to start this project, I'm actually gonna start with my white. I had to rinse my brush off. Dry it off, dry it off. Okay, so I'm gonna pick a spot on my paper that's gonna be my moon. And I'm gonna have it be kind of up at the top here. Okay, lots of white to start out with. Now, without rinsing my brush off, I still have a lot of white on there. I'm just gonna dip it, just the very end of it, into my purple paint. Hardly any. You see how much I have on the end there? Because when you mix white with a color, it makes that color a lighter version of itself. So instead of dark purple, I just made a really light purple, okay? Now, since this project is all about making a gradient from a light purple to a dark purple, I'm gonna do this all in one fell swoop. I'm working a little bit quickly, right? Because I don't want my paint to dry too much. Now, I'm gonna dip it in my purple again, and I'm working my way out around my moon shape. Notice how my brush strokes, when I control my paintbrush, I'm moving it around in a circular shape around my circle. Okay, so that's something to think about as you're working. Now, I've had a lot of experience with painting, okay? It's not always gonna look exactly like this, especially if we're still learning how to paint. So don't feel like yours has to look exactly like mine, okay? Any way that you wanna do this project is completely up to you. So now notice how as I'm getting further away from that white circle, I'm picking up more and more and more of my purple paint. I'm hardly even using my white paint anymore. around and around, and I'm kind of going back. I'm working my way away from it, and then I'll come closer to it again so that it's all blending together. My brush is going back and forth, right? Pick up a little more purple when it starts to dry out. Don't forget the corners of your paper, right? We're working all the way to the edges, just like this. Okay, now the furthest point away from my white circle is going to be the ground for my spooky silhouette. So the closer that I get to the very bottom of my paper, I might even start to dip my paintbrush into my black paint, especially now that I'm down at the very bottom. So hold it up, because right now it's facing me. But you can kind of see how this part is going to be the ground. So I think I'm ready to dip it in my black now. Dip it in, dip, dip, dip. And then I'll spread my black across at the bottom, okay? Now, all of this paint is going to be a little bit wet, right? Before I can do my spooky black silhouette, I need this to dry a little bit. If I were to try to add my black silhouette right now, instead of the black paint sitting on top of the purple paint, it's gonna mix with the purple paint. And that's not really the effect that I'm going for. So let this dry, let it dry completely, and then we'll be ready for our silhouettes. Now, I did prepare one ahead of time. So I've got one that's dry right here, ready to go. It's a little bit different, but same idea, right? So I'll let that one dry. It's dry, it's ready to go. I can start doing my silhouette. There are so many different ways that you guys could do this. Think about spooky things. Think about jack-o'-lanterns, pumpkins, ghosts, bats, a spooky Halloween tree. Maybe there's a witch flying in the background. There could be a zombie or a mummy walking through the cemetery, okay? Up to you. So for the silhouette, since the silhouette is like a really dark shadow, the only color I'm gonna use for my silhouette is the black. So I'll rinse my brush off, right? Make sure it's clean and it's dry. There's no other colors hiding in my bristles. Now I'm ready. I'm gonna dip it in my black, dip, 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 get it nice and covered. And I think the first thing I'm gonna do is make a ground, right? The foreground, which means this could be the cemetery, this could be a pumpkin patch. Okay, back and forth, dip it in again if you start to run out. Now, it might be beneficial to have two different paintbrushes. If you've got a nice big thick one for the big spots like this, that helps, because I kind of have a lot of space to cover. Once you get into the little details, like a bat or a teeny tiny branch off of your tree, it might be helpful to have a skinnier paintbrush, okay? Small brushes for small details, big brushes for big details. So here we can see, I'll hold it up. I've got a big black chunk across the bottom. That's like my ground, okay? Kind of the first step to this one as well. This one's even a little bit darker. It's gonna be hard to see my silhouettes, okay? Now I'm ready to add my shapes. The shape of a gravestone, which I think is what I'm gonna make on mine, is kind of like an arched top to it, almost like a circle without a bottom. So I'm just gonna sketch out a couple of these big lumps. And another one. I don't have a tiny paintbrush with me today, so a lot of my details are gonna be big ones, and that's okay. I'm gonna put little crosses on the top of mine, make it spooky. Again, no right or wrong way. These could look like anything, right? Okay, maybe in my sky, I want to do some bats. I'll try my best. Like I said, I've got a big paintbrush, but a bat has ears and a big circle head, and they have wings that come up off the sides, and I'll hold this up in a minute so that you guys can see from your perspective. And if I just drag some lines down like this, oh yeah, oh, that looks spooky. Ooh. Maybe I want to draw lines behind it to make it look like my bat's moving really fast. There, he's swooping back and forth. Okay, So this is just a really quick example. I'm sure you guys can get a lot more detailed with yours, okay? Be creative. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with and have fun.